What if I told you that the exact same psychological trait, the one that allows a CEO to build a massive billion-dollar empire, is actually the precise mechanism that's going to eventually destroy it?
Right. It's a wild thought.
It is. I mean, we have the societal assumption, right, that these highly successful, insanely intelligent leaders are basically operating like supercomputers.
Yeah, that they just look at the data and rationally weigh all the risks.
Exactly. They weigh the risks, they make the rational choice. But then you look at the actual corporate landscape, and it is just littered with brilliant people at the absolute top of their game making these spectacular, catastrophic decisions. It just leaves you speechless.
It really shatters that whole illusion of the hyper-rational executive, doesn't it? I mean, the paradox of leadership is that as the stakes get higher and, the information gets more complex, the decision-making process actually gets less logical.
Less logical.
Yeah, less logical. The consequences of their choices multiply exponentially, but the cognitive tools they're using to make those choices, they often regress into something deeply primal.
Which is basically the core mission of our deep dive today. We're taking this incredibly dense but frankly wildly fascinating academic framework and we're just crashing it head on into one of the most infamous sports and business scandals in history.
It is such a perfect synthesis.
It really is. So our stack of sources today is incredible. We are working primarily with an insane master's thesis by Nikolai Bank, which focuses on executive decision-making. And he uses psychodynamics and Daniel Kahnemann's concepts of System 1 and System 2 thinking.
Right.
And we're combining his framework with some really explosive biographical sources, specifically the book Wheelman and a deeply revealing YouTube interview charting the phenomenal rise and the absolute complete obliteration of Lance Armstrong.
We're looking at the good decisions, the bad decisions, and specifically those two key pivots that brought down an entire empire.
Yeah, and I think the corporate world and the world of elite sports, they actually share this very specific delusion about how choices are made. I mean, the sources mention that companies globally spend something like $300 billion annually on corporate training.
$300 billion. That is a massive number.
Huge. And a massive chunk of that goes directly toward teaching executives these structured, rational decision-making models.
Right, like listing the pros and cons.
Exactly. The expectation is you list the pros, you list the cons, evaluate the data matrix, and execute. But the in-said thesis reveals this staggering disconnect. Executives simply do not make decisions that way in the wild.
They just don't.
No.
They constantly deviate from normative models. They rely heavily on unconscious intuitive biases.
Which makes the author of this thesis, Nikolai Bank, the perfect lens for this. Because of his background, right? She didn't start in a boardroom.
No, he started in a military bunker.
Right, as a surface-to-air missile firing officer, which is wild.
Mm-hmm.
So he was conditioned to make these life-and-death, totally rational missile launch decisions based on strict, unyielding if-this-then-that protocols.
Yes.
But then he goes from that highly structured environment into the corporate boardroom.
Expecting the same rigor.
Expecting a similar level of rigor, yeah. And he realizes these highly paid executives are essentially just relying on gut feeling.
Yeah, it's all intuition.
Yeah. But I have to push back a little here. Because when I hear gut feeling, I instantly think of guessing. And a CEO has an entire floor of data analysts. Are we really saying that global leadership is just high-stakes guessing?
Well, no, not guessing. It's more of an unconscious battle between two totally distinct cognitive systems, which is where Daniel Kahnemann's framework becomes really essential.
Oh, right, Kahnemann.
Exactly. So you have System 1, right, which is fast, it's automatic, effortless, highly intuitive. It's basically an evolutionary survival tool. Like when someone throws a ball at your face and you duck before you even realize what's happening.
Right, you don't think about ducking, you just do it.
Exactly. That's System 1.
Yeah.
Then you have System 2, which is slow, deliberate, rational, and requires immense caloric and cognitive effort. That's the part of your brain that does complex math or fills out a tax return.
Okay, yeah. It takes actual work.
Right. So what Bank experienced in the military was an environment that trained System 2 so rigorously, just drilling those missile launch protocols into muscle memory, that the rational process almost functioned at the speed of System 1.
Oh, wow. So they essentially hacked the brain to make the slow math happen instantly.
Exactly. But in the corporate world, the environment is just way too fluid for that. Bank found that executives end up leaning heavily on System 1 intuition just to survive the sheer volume of information they're getting bombarded with every day.
I can totally see the tension there.
Yeah.
Because in a corporate culture that absolutely worships data, leaning on a gut instinct probably feels almost taboo, right?
Right. It's heavily stigmatized.
Yeah. And the thesis mentions this idea of the clinical paradigm, which I thought was fascinating. It essentially argues that all human behavior, even the most self-destructive, seemingly completely irrational choices, they actually make perfect logical sense if you look closely enough.
Exactly. But the logic isn't based on spreadsheets.
No, it's rooted in a person's unconscious drives,
Hmm.
their past trauma, their emotions. The psychodynamic approach calls this a person's inner theater.
That inner theater dictates the script for every single decision. And you touched on a crucial point regarding the taboo aspect. The thesis highlights that executives often harbor a deep sense of shame about relying on System 1.
Oh, really?
Yeah. System 2 is viewed as the noble path. It's quantifiable. It's defensible to a board of directors. They feel they aren't allowed to just use their intuition. But the brutal reality of climbing the corporate ladder is that you suffer from severe information overload.
You just can't process it all.
You can't. You simply lack the time and cognitive bandwidth to use System 2 for every choice. You are forced to rely on your inner theater's System 1 processing to keep your head above water.
So let's apply that directly to what has to be the ultimate high-speed, high-stakes environment, which is professional cycling.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if we're going to understand the actual mechanics of Lance Armstrong's catastrophic choices, we really have to look at the pressure cooker he was operating in.
Right, and the specific script playing out in his inner theater.
Because this wasn't just a guy riding a bike fast.
Far from it. I mean, the sources detail how Armstrong viewed the Tour de France not merely as a physical endurance test, but as this massive, uncontrollable political organism.
Yeah, the peloton.
Right, the main pack of rider. It was a complete ecosystem of shifting power dynamics.
In that YouTube interview we sourced, he paints a terrifying picture of the cognitive load required to just exist in that space. He says, you have 9 guys on a team trying to control 200 other riders on the road.
Which is basically impossible.
Right. It's NASCAR on bicycles, but without the steel cage to protect you.
Hey.
So you're fighting for physical position at 40 miles an hour, but you are simultaneously playing this multi-level politics game.
Yeah.
He even points out that the riders who are your allies and friends on day 2, they might become your bitter enemies by day 8, just depending on the stage rankings.
So consider the biological reality of that exact moment. You are physically exhausted. You're operating at the absolute razor's edge of human cardiovascular endurance.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, you are attempting to cognitively process all the shifting allegiances, the threats, the strategies of 200 competitors in real time. System 2, that slow, deliberate, rational processor, it simply cannot function under those conditions.
It's just overwhelmed.
Totally overwhelmed. The executive function is overloaded. You are relying entirely on the fast, intuitive processing of System 1 just to avoid crashing your bike.
Just to stay upright. And the specific System 1 that Armstrong brought to that peloton was, well, it was formidable. When we look at the analysis from the book Wheelman, his inner theater really comes into sharp focus.
Very sharp.
This was a man with a fierce, almost terrifying, win-at-all-costs competitor mindset. The sources call it his N+1 mentality.
Yeah, N+1.
Yeah, like whatever effort you put in, I will do one more. And, he survived advanced, highly aggressive cancer.
Which is incredible.
It is. And that forged this unbelievable iron will.
Yeah.
But according to the biographical sources, it also seemed to just strip away a lot of empathy.
Yeah, they describe these borderline sociopathic tendencies where he just blew through personal and professional relationships the instant they ceased being useful to his goals.
There is this detail in the sources that is both darkly funny and just incredibly sad. His ex-wife actually referred to herself as a was-band.
A was-band. Wow.
Yeah, instead of a husband, a was-band.
That was a Bobbin comment. It perfectly illustrates the collateral damage of a relentless inner theater. When we filter Armstrong's personality through the INSEAD psychodynamic framework, we are looking at a textbook, extreme manifestation of survival anxiety.
I want to dig into that because when I read the term survival anxiety in the thesis, it made me think of the animal kingdom, like an animal backed into a corner fighting for its life. Is the thesis really arguing that a CEO in a boardroom or a cyclist in a race is physiologically reacting the same way as a cornered predator?
The human brain certainly processes it that way, yeah. Survival anxiety is the overwhelming fear that if you fail to act, your very existence, which in a modern context means your career, your identity, your mythos, will be completely annihilated.
Wow.
In the 1990s, Armstrong entered an environment where, according to the sources, everyone at the top was doping. Competitors like Bjarne Riis, Miguel Indurain, Marco Pantani. The sport was a self-perpetuating machine of performance enhancement. So if you wanted to survive in that peloton, your System 1 intuition screamed that abstaining equaled professional death. The instinct to survive just overrides any ethical considerations.
But he didn't just survive, though. He optimized the entire concept of survival. He built an impenetrable fortress around his anxiety. The sources show he was insulated by incredibly powerful corporate sponsors.
Trek, Nike, Oakley.
Yeah, and this massive, sophisticated web of doctors, lawyers, and enablers. And they all profited immensely from the Lance effect. He became a one-man multinational corporation.
When an executive, and at this point Armstrong is effectively the CEO of his own brand,
Right.
when they are surrounded by an organization that directly benefits from their aggressive System 1 choices, those choices cease to be challenged. They are validated and rewarded constantly.
Which just reinforces the behavior.
Exactly. The feedback loop tells the inner theater that this aggressive intuition is flawless. That validation sets the exact trap for the catastrophic decisions to come.
Which brings us to the first massive pivot, the moment the trap is really set. According to the Wheelman sources, Lance Armstrong wins his third Tour de France.
He's on top of the world?
He is untouchable.
Yeah.
But race officials actually take him aside and tell him explicitly that new drug tests are coming the following year.
Right. The technology is catching up.
The loophole is closing.
So the environment that allowed his whole survival strategy to flourish is fundamentally changing. The existential threat is back.
And this is the part that just completely breaks my brain. Because if he stops right then, at 3 wins, he retires a legend.
Absolutely.
He remains the cancer survivor who conquered the world, this undisputed American hero. The fairy tale is totally pristine. But instead, he keeps going.
He goes for 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah. So if System 2 is the rational risk-assessing part of our brain, why doesn't it slam on the brakes here?
Right.
Like a rational CEO with a risk management team would see the incoming tests and liquidate the liability, right?
Yeah.
Why didn't?
Because the INSEAD thesis reveals a really critical vulnerability in human cognition. Anxiety profoundly impairs both intuition and rational thought.
Okay, how so?
Well, when an executive faces a severe existential threat, and for Armstrong, losing his dominance or having his mythic status shattered, that was equivalent to death.
Right.
Their core motivation shifts entirely to reducing immediate uncertainty.
I'm struggling with that logic a bit, though, because wouldn't retiring reduce the uncertainty completely? I mean, he'd be out of the testing pool. He'd be safe.
Logically, yes, System 2 would totally agree with you. But psychodynamically, absolutely not. The thesis notes that under extreme pressure, executives will sometimes make a forceful, aggressive decision just to relieve the anxiety of the immediate moment.
Just to feel in control.
Exactly. Stepping down feels like surrender, which induces way more anxiety for a hyper-competitive personality. Inaction feels like dying. Armstrong's inner theater was defined by hubris, megalomania, and a deeply ingrained belief in his own invincibility.
So that unconscious script completely hijacked his rational system, too.
It did.
So the anxiety of stepping away from the power was actually greater than the anxiety of getting caught. Instead of mitigating the risk, he just goes on the offensive.
He expands his control. The sources detail how his team owner, Tom Weissel, executed this brazen power play to oust USA Cycling's top leadership. They effectively gained control of the sport's governing body in the United States.
Unbelievable.
Armstrong didn't just keep racing, he absorbed the regulatory environment into his fortress to crush the anxiety of being caught.
It's incredible. He rigged the casino because he was afraid of the new dealer. But taking that metaphor a step further, rigging the casino actually requires a ton of calculated effort. It's not a panicked reaction, it's systemic control. It seems like his System 1 instinct to dominate completely enlisted his System 2 planning abilities to build a better cheating apparatus.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it.
Yeah.
It is a classic executive failure mode outlined in the framework. When faced with a complex, high-risk situation that demands a slow System 2 evaluation of long-term consequences, the executive substitutes it with a fast System 1 heuristic.
A familiar rule of thumb.
Exactly. For Armstrong, his lifelong heuristic was always attack, dominate, control. It saved him from cancer, it won him races, so his intuition told him to apply it to the governing bodies of the sport.
But the house eventually catches on, right?
Yeah.
No matter how much you control the floor. And that Desperate need for control leads directly into key pivot number 2, which is the war with USADA, the United States Anti-Doping Agency.
Right.
So fast forward a few years, Armstrong is retired. The doping rumors have evolved from whispers to basically an open secret. Federal investigators are circling. Former teammates have broken the omerta. They're talking. The walls are closing in.
And then, inexplicably, he's offered a lifeline.
A lifeline that most executives caught in a massive scandal would pay millions to secure.
Oh, it's unbelievably generous.
It is. According to the sources, if Armstrong had just owned up to the doping 6 months earlier than he eventually did, USADA was offering him a deal. He would have only lost 2 of his yellow jerseys and received a 6-month suspension.
A 6-month suspension. A strategic retreat that preserves the vast majority of his legacy and his wealth.
Yeah, he would have kept 5 tour wins. From a purely business perspective, taking that deal is the ultimate good System 2 decision.
Yeah.
It protects his massive personal fortune. It protects his Livestrong Foundation. It legally limits the damage. It is a parking ticket.
Right.
But he chooses to get into a high-speed car chase with the police instead. He chooses total war. He tries to bully and extort USADA in the court of public opinion. I understand the hubris from the first pivot, I really do, but why choose guaranteed destruction here?
To understand that, we have to look at one of the most profound and frankly counterintuitive concepts in the INSEAD thesis, and that is the decision as a transitional object.
Okay, let's unpack that, because I know the psychologist Donald Winnicott actually coined the term transitional object to describe a toddler's security blanket.
Exactly.
An object that provides emotional security and soothes the anxiety of separation. Are we really saying that a 50-year-old CEO is using corporate strategy the exact same way a toddler uses a teddy bear?
The mechanism is functionally identical. The INSEAD thesis argues that executives use the physical act of making a forceful decision as a sort of cognitive pressure valve. It's not about the business outcome of the decision, it's about the neurochemical relief it provides.
So the act of fighting back physically masks the anxiety.
Yes. Taking aggressive action spikes dopamine. It provides a temporary illusion of control, which actually helps regulate their cortisol levels.
Wow, so it literally soothes their internal terror.
Precisely. For Armstrong, admitting fault, accepting a suspension, submitting to an authority like USADA, that would have violated every fundamental rule in his inner theater.
Because it requires acknowledging weakness.
Right, and to his unconscious mind, weakness meant death. Survival anxiety kicks in.
That makes terrifying sense. Attacking Travis Tygart, the head of USADA, suing them, trying to destroy witnesses in the press. The aggression was his security blanket. It made him feel like he was still the boss of the peloton.
Exactly. It completely blinded him to the actual math of the situation. It was a wildly maladaptive defense mechanism.
He used a fast, aggressive System 1 response to emotionally pacify himself.
And by doing so, he forced USADA's hand, which led to absolute devastation.
The fallout outlined in the sources is just staggering. Because he relentlessly bullied USADA, he backed them into a corner where they had absolutely no choice but to defend their integrity.
Right. They had to publish the reasons document.
Yeah, this massive dossier that laid out every sordid detail of the conspiracy to the public. If he had just taken the deal and stayed quiet, those details might have remained sealed forever.
His need for control is exactly what destroyed his control.
It's so ironic. And the cost of that transition object. He lost $75 million in sponsorships in a single day.
$75 million.
In one day. He received a lifetime ban from all sanctioned sports. He was stripped of all 7 of his Tour de France titles. The mythic story was just reduced to ashes.
And yet, the most fascinating part of the source material is how, even years later, his inner theater is still frantically trying to spin it.
Oh my gosh, yes. In that YouTube interview, he makes this incredibly bizarre justification. He claims he wasn't technically caught.
Yes, the semantic gymnastics routine. He insists he was exposed, not caught.
He argues that because he never failed a specific drug test on a given day during the tour, he wasn't caught. As if a massive federal investigation, sworn affidavits, and the testimonies of a dozen teammates exposing an international blood doping ring somehow doesn't meet the criteria.
Right.
It's wild. How does a rational brain allow that sentence to even leave his mouth?
It is the ultimate rationalization by the unconscious mind trying to preserve its foundational script. His ego simply cannot process the reality of total defeat.
So it just rewrites reality.
Exactly. To survive the cognitive dissonance, it invents a semantic loophole to maintain the narrative of invincibility. In his inner theater, he still outsmarted the tests.
It's fascinating, but honestly, it's a little terrifying to think about our own minds working that way. I mean, we need to bring this down from the high-stakes drama of the Tour de France and $100 million sponsorships to the listener's daily reality.
Right, because these mechanisms are universal.
Exactly. We might not be rigging international sporting events, but how often do we let our own inner theater force us into catastrophic decisions simply because we feel anxious?
It dictates behavior in every office, every single day. Think of an executive who's just terrified of a sudden market shift. Instead of carefully analyzing the new data using System 2, they fire off a massive disruptive reorganization plan just to feel like they are doing something.
Oh, wow. I've definitely seen that happen. They just reshuffle the org chart to feel busy.
Exactly. The reshuffle is the transitional object. Or take a mid-level manager who feels insecure about a brilliant new hire, so they micromanage that person into quitting, purely to maintain a feeling of control.
Right, because if they control everything, they don't have to face the fear of being replaced.
The scale is completely different, but the psychodynamic mechanism is identical to Armstrong's.
So if we synthesize Nikolai Bank's framework and the Lance Armstrong disaster, what are the actionable takeaways? How do we actually stop our own inner theater from hijacking the controls?
Well, the sources point to 3 critical interventions. First, we must aggressively acknowledge the role of anxiety in our choices. We love to view ourselves as rational actors.
We all think we're System 2 all the time.
Exactly. But if you cannot recognize when you are operating out of fear or survival anxiety, your System 1 intuition will bypass your logic every single time.
So you have to feel the anxiety without letting it drive the car.
Precisely. The second takeaway is the absolute necessity of psychological safety within organizations.
Psychological safety. Okay, what does that look like?
Well, the INSEAD thesis highlights that if a corporate environment punishes vulnerability or demands absolute perfection, people will inherently lie about their mistakes.
Right, because telling the truth becomes an existential threat.
Exactly. Armstrong's ecosystem was the antithesis of psychological safety. It was built on a MRTA, a rigid code of silence.
Yeah.
If your culture dictates that you can't admit an error, human nature dictates that you will eventually build a conspiracy to hide it.
That makes me look at corporate culture completely differently. And what's the final intervention?
We must learn to recognize the transitional object in our own behavior. We need the self-awareness to catch ourselves when we are making a fast, aggressive decision just to soothe our nerves, rather than doing the slow, uncomfortable System 2 math.
So before you execute a major choice, you have to stop and ask yourself, am I making this decision to actually solve the problem, or am I making it just to alleviate my own anxiety in this moment? Am I grabbing for the security blanket, or am I actually looking at the data? That is an incredibly powerful lens for self-reflection. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. I mean, synthesizing heavy academic psychodynamic theory with one of those massive cultural scandals of our lifetime, it really changes the way you look at success, failure, and the hidden mechanics of leadership.
The mechanisms are always running in the background. But before we wrap up, I do want to leave everyone with one final, deeply unsettling thought based on the INSEAD thesis.
Oh, okay. Well, let's hear it.
So the framework makes it clear that the unconscious inner theater is the engine driving our choices.
Right.
But consider the full scope of Armstrong's life. What if the exact same psychodynamic flaws, the monumental hubris, the megalomania, the blind reliance on System 1 intuition, the absolute refusal to surrender under any circumstances?
Yeah.
What if those were the only reason he was able to beat aggressive cancer, win 7 tours, and raise hundreds of millions of dollars for charity in the first place?
Oh, wow. So you can't untangle the two.
It raises a really profound question about the nature of high achievers. Can you surgically remove the catastrophic decision maker without also destroying the champion? Yeah.
Suddenly, that clean line between the hero and the villain doesn't look so clear after all. We'll leave you to mull that one over.